Bhagavato Arahato Dhamma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Dhamma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Dhamma Sambuddhassa. Today, Yangon UN WIP office man. Dhamma workshop in the Pompira Council, recognizing boundaries with boundless heart. The backup boundary in Yaibe. No, the backup boundary in Yai. Loloreniamo Posita. Lo Genehari, Lolo Mayara, Mayara Karai, you come up against barrier, all sorts of barrier, limits people. Amiaibe. The Joharia, go yoye limit, the Joharia budget limit, the Joharia, any society go operate the society, social perception through a limit. The Joharia lose the higher capacity limit. And you know, limit in Yashi. A Tijarema or UN in S and Tima Puaraka or Nanganimutu, so Tari, nation state go, a chicken biro or Lotara. A nation state, she don't have to limit to me. Machine level to a Mayao. The local long or Ocho Haka, till a small unit, smaller unit in a low recognition. To a yara. I don't blue webship say, do that in a nega. Limit our milk yaswa. A twitch of the other. Cocorais whenever car. A yanivio, Yonara, Yonomaya, energy a bloody limited young yara come at a caragalua. Check on Lebanchan. Ellery said, I don't limit allow Miani and near boundaries, allow Miani and near Makoa, Pelomaro. Central Europe was Senate Jovi or Nissen Joanna. A treaty or Hungary is Permak was in a drug was my German back and Naviro or power net, Poco was the Austro-Hungarian. Pero Taji come a limited Palau Yaros rally. And yet a Miaco frustrated pitted Poco. A Sipwell of Drusima, a subset Larry. Ediane. Permak was in a drug was in my people carry a tweeton, in time or a session and in a Tumiaga Drogo, Hope Chati Chapiro, Hanke Lumus and could check Hemalashi, Romania Hemalashi, Romania Hemaso, I know don't sell a sheet of Lopuri. Or Serbia Hemalashi, Elemona Tugo, Jambiro, Matuna Al, aggressive Mapship Al, or Germany go. Mohammed low to low. Alora Canchara, I limited go Macan to a day and near a told up city. Sakaviola between history, jump jomla, science jump jomla, a Kulosa Pina jomla, pure viso. Through it said him, there's nothing except frustration. Frustration, Beji. Or Doda. I know. Abjema Maloemetui, Joyana boundary, she barrier, she limitation is she. A Jama go on Macan de Cacharo, a barrier, dear poor G. Barcelona go multiplying like that. Two kind with any ama. A barrier, never Malone. And I jump yes of Yaga Pamena also. Limit sheet loga even him. Limit machine. စိတ်စွမ်းရည်နဲ့နှလုံးသားစွမ်းရည်နဲ့ operate လုပ်နိုင်ရမယ် this is the only way လောကကြီးက limit တွေရှိတယ်ဆိုတာကိုအဘိဓမ္မာထဲမှာပရိဋ္ဌာဓမ္မဆိုဒါတော့ဟိုကြားဘူးနဲ့ကြားဘူးလိမ့်မယ်ကိစ္စပရိဋ္ဌာဓမ္မဆိုတာဘုံတို့ရရှိထားတဲ့ဒီခန္ဓာကိုယ်နဲ့ဒီစိတ်ခါတို့သူက limit တွေနဲ့အစားတော့ဆိုရင်လည်းပဲစားထားတဲ့မနဲ့စားမကြခင်သူ energy ကကုန်တော့မယ်သူ energy limited ဖြစ်တယ်နောက်မစားဘဲနဲ့ချက်ပြီးတော့ဒီတိုင်းထားရင်အဲ့ဒီအစားအသောက်လည်းပဲဘလောက်ကြာခံနေတော့ it has expired date အဲ့ဒါလည်းပဲ limit ရှိတယ်အဲ့လို limit ရှိတဲ့နေရာမှာအသက်ရှင်ရတာတဲ့ဒါပေမဲ့ဒီသဘောတရားတွေကိုနားလည်ပြီးတော့ကိုချင်းစာနိုင်နေဆိုရင်တော့ကိုယ့်ရဲ့နှလုံးသားက limitless capacity ဖြစ်သွားမယ်အဲ့ဒါအပမနာဓမ္မပါဠိလိုဒီဟာတိတ်မလို့ဘုံဘုံကိုဟို whiteboard တင်နာချပေးပါလား whiteboard လေးချပေးပါဒီဟာလေးရှေ့ကိုနည်းနည်းလေးရွှေ့ပြီးတော့ဒီနားလေးကို whiteboard လေးချပေးတယ်ဘုံကရေးချင်တယ်လေးတယ်အမြုပ်သားလေရပြီအဲ့ဒါဆိုရကတ်ထားလိုက်အဲ့ဒီဟိုနောက်ကတ်ထားလိုက်ဟုတ်ပြီပိတ်တော့ကောင်းတယ်ပိတ်ရင်အဲ့ဖွင့်ချလို့ပုံမြင်ရเอาของเขาผมว่าป่าเลยเอาของ1 2 3ချားတယ်တင်နေနော်ဒါပုံမရင်ဒီနိုင်ဝအေးအေးသားပဲနေလို့အဘိဓမ္မာမှာလောကကြီးကိုမုံလို့ဟိုအင်္ဂလိပ်လိုဆိုရင် triad ခေါ်တာပေါ့ triad ပါဠိလိုကျတော့တိကဆိုတာသုံးခုခွဲပြီးတော့မြင်တယ်ဟာ triad အနေနဲ့မြင်တယ်မြင်တဲ့အခါမှာဘယ်လိုမြင်ပရိဋ္ဌာဓမ္မဆိုတာကဟိုပရိဋ္ဌတရားမှာပါတယ်ပရိဋ္ဌအတိုင်းပဲဒါပေမဲ့အတိပ္ပယ်ကတခြားစီဒီပရိဋ္ဌက limitation ဓမ္မက nature the nature of limitation ဒီလောကရဲ့ထဲမှာအပြင်ဝတ္ထုက limit ရှိတယ်အဲ့ဒါဘုံပြောခဲ့ပြီးအစားဒီပန်းအရန်လှတယ်ဘလောက်ချက်ခံနေသူ limit ရှိမနဲ့စားခဲ့တယ်ဘယ်နှနိုင်ခံမနေ့ညတညလုံးနားခဲ့တယ်အဲ့ဒီ recharge လုပ်ထားတဲ့ energy ဘယ်လောက်ထိခံတယ်အကောင်လုံးက limit ရှိတယ်ပရိဋ္ဌာဓမ္မနော်ဒါ limitation limitations အဲ့ limitation ရှိတဲ့ဟာကိုတကယ်လို့လူတယောက်ကသူ့ရဲ့စိတ်ကိုတည်ငြိမ်အောင်လုပ်ရင်စိတ်ကိုတည်ငြိမ်အောင်လုပ်နိုင်ရင်တဲ့တမာတိတစ်ခုတည်းပဲ concentration တစ်ခုပဲတိုးလိုက်ဒီရောက်လာပြီသူ့ရဲ့ capacity ကို limitation မပြောင်းမဲ့သူ့ရဲ့ capacity ဒီ limitation တွေကို handle လုပ်တဲ့နေရာ manage လုပ်တဲ့နေရာမှာသူ့ရဲ့ capacity ကိုသူက enlarge လုပ်လိုက်တယ် enlarge capacity increase capacity increase capacity သူလည်း limit ရှိသေးတယ်တရားကြတော့ဒီ limit ကပရိဒဆိုတာက small တဲ့သေးငယ်တယ်ပေါ့ capacity small သူ limitation ပိုများဒီမှာကျတော့ capacity ကိုမြင့်လိုက်တာနဲ့ဒီ limitation တွေကိုကင်တွယ်ရတဲ့ဟာကပိုလွယ်လာတယ် limitation တော့မပြောင်းဘူးဒါပေမဲ့သူ့ကိုနားလည်နိုင်စွမ်းသူကို handle နိုင်စွမ်းသူကို cope နိုင်စွမ်းအဲ့ဒီဟာကအများကြီးညင်လာတယ်အပမာဏဆိုတာကပမာဏကအတိုင်းတာအကမရှိဘူးဒီမှာကျတော့အတိုင်းတာမရှိဘူးဒါကျတော့ limitless ဖြစ်သွားပြီ limitless ဖြစ်သွား limitless ဖြစ်သွားဆို inner transformation ဖြစ်ရတယ် inner transformation ဒီမှာကျတော့ concentration ကိုအခြေခံတယ်ဒီမှာကျတော့ attitude နဲ့ဒီ transformation ခန္ဓာကိုယ်နဲ့စိတ်နဲ့ transformation ဒီဟာကိုအဓိကထားပါတယ်ဒီနေ့အပမာဏဓမ္မဆိုတာကအရိယာပုဂ္ဂိုလ်တွေကိုပြောတာအရိယာပုဂ္ဂိုလ်တွေအိမ်မှာလင်မယားနှစ်ယောက်တယောက်ကိုတယောက်နားလည်နေစွမ်းက limit ရှိအဲ့ဒါကြောင့်အမြဲတမ်းသတိထားနေအမြဲတမ်းစိတ်မဆိုးအောင်နေရတယ်ပြီးရင်focus ပြောင်းရတယ်ကလေးတွေရလာဆို focus ကလေးတွေရောင်းသွားတဲ့ခါကျတော့ကလေးရလာတဲ့ခါမှာဖြစ်ပေါ်လာတဲ့မိဘရဲ့စိတ်နဲ့တူပေါ်မှာတူပို့ပြီးတော့တီးခံနိုင်တယ်ဆိုတာဒါကိုယ့်ရဲ့ capacity ကိုမြင့်တာကလေးကမြင့်ပြီးဒီနေရာကျတော့အပမာဏကျတော့အတွေ့အကြုံတစ်ခုလုံးကိုပြန်စဉ်းစားပြီးတော့ဥပမာသတိပဋ္ဌာန်ဆိုသတိပဋ္ဌာန်နဲ့ပြန်ကြည့်ရတယ်တခုမှထွက်မပြေဘူးဒီ limit ကိုတွေးတဲ့အခါမှာဘုန်းတို့ကထွက်ပြေးတဲ့အခါထွက်ပြေးတယ် fight and flight လုပ်နေတယ် fight and flight ကဒီနေရာမှာရှိတယ် what do we fight we fight with limitation ဒီဟာအရန်လို့ချင်တယ်လို့မရဆိုတော့ခါတယ် struggle don't immorals in the struggle လည်းဖြစ်တဲ့အပြင် struggle လည်းဖြစ်တဲ့အပြောဆိုဖြစ်လာအဲ့ဒါမျိုးတွေပေါ့ fight and flight ကဒီမှာရှိchild ကပြောတယ် fight and flight အခု psychologist တွေပြော fight flight and freeze က fight လည်းပဲကိုမအောင်မြင်ဘူးမရအောင် flight လို့လည်းပဲမလွတ်ဘူး and frozen ဖြစ်သွားတာဟိုကလေးတွေကြည့်တဲ့ frozen ဇာတ်ကားကြည့်ဘူးလားဘုံမမကြည့်ဘူး summer school မှာကလေးတွေကိုတရားသင်ပေးပြီးတော့ဟိုနေ့တရားထိုင်တာသင်ပေး Buddhist story တွေသင် ethics တွေသင်ပေးပြီးတော့နောက်ဆုံးနေ့မှာကဲသူတို့ကပြောတယ်သူတို့ presentation လုပ်လို့ရတယ်ဆိုတော့လုပ်ချင်လို့ဆိုအဲ့ဟာတွေသူတို့ introduce လုပ်ဘုံမတော့ကိုယ်တိုင်လက်မှတ်နဲ့ကြည့်ရတယ်သူတို့ဆိုတော့ကမဟကတာဓမ္မရောက်လာတဲ့အခါမှာကိုယ် capacity များလာတဲ့အခါကျတော့ fight and flight ကနည်းသွားလို့ပြောတာ understanding capacity မြင့်သွားတာ The Yavana Kaso understand capacity limitless. Pressure go united, stress go united capacity limitless. Can I see that? So you resilient Makaro. So resilience is a longo, but don't know. Well, being at peace, peaceful tone. Candy is a longa, or Pali Lutheran has a deacon, a tebe yarabo. I is Sigalon lepe, the carcass deacon is a pajan deacon. That's what Manino deacon. Queen Lydia, who are singing in it. Sancha can Candiza deacon change the lagauso. At Queen Lydia. Shema, Tatarete, Candiza, Manilo deacon in the lagao. My Sanskrit matter of Kandi go through Shanti lo debate, peace lo debate. Deacon near Suraka, Diema, accept low capacity ga, Mapi deum. Dear go dear, if I accept you as you are, Ludia got what dilucide. Anyhow, go like and like be swing. Did Hamaka, two decambo, Kesa, Bogo Pomalao. Decambo, literally. Barcelona, so I'm at peace with you. A deacon is a risk to the two pure Nanego, next Sunday, pure. How do you mean? I don't. Mature Harigo, like and like there's no question of tolerance. So sometimes the word tolerance people think has negative connotation. So acceptance and being at peace is this one. The Tibetan accept Lokaina. Jare is when Jare Mapa Jare Jare Haligo, like and kind. Lemacamu, Jara Lego, Madilaibu, swing. I jar how, Majida Sega, Chechem Pit. Pillaviro do net yam city. Jidus win no lebe, I now go Padoyo. Jidus win, you run after that. You run after that object. Majai swing, you run away from that object. So running. The beauty. The beauty. I am able to yomola the gadgets around. Tainaro carbon of it, by my sake of peony. Say a peony. Say, Aima, Twiniare, and Twijone, experience gadgets experience fighting load. Fighting load of what? Mayao, share Kalamishu, now Kalamishu, be a Kalamishu, Monsieur Suro. Say, Yango, knit one. Fight and flight. At the motor way. Energy and now don't you get the second level, a young go. Second level, a young go, restless pity. Had I down Oda de Aroma. The breakdown limitation may be limitless. Uppermana Tamago Lara, Pane Lara, so 2 year instrument, 2 year pathway. Demanding mindless pity, demanding mindful pity, ain't a cool backward. Being mindful, being mindless. Being mindful, Saraka, the D sheet, the D chicken. Making ship has no the D chicken. The whole eightfold part is based on mindfulness. Tata Dimacharo, mindless rock. Say the linear, but load that and load my, say a machine. This hour, my pomo was 2 lines like pipe jamming. So for happy that no more good Suraka Google company got chief business officer. Through university didn't she? Now we through a Google University mindfulness go leadership training in a period. Mindfulness man. See neither ho Napaku US Natao charge. Samyana Niane Nasacha Hong Papian. Sheer Hali, Nanelli background. Met killing words obtract your happiness org. Taga.com. Ran a study with more than 15,000 participants who reported sometimes minute by minute how they felt and what they were doing at the times. The study collected more than 650 reports and presented a profound discovery. Regardless of what people were doing at any given time, they were noticeably happier when they were fully present. Mindful job satisfaction. It didn't even matter what they were thinking about. It didn't matter if it was a present, a neutral or unpleasant thought. When they were focused outside the present, people were less happy. At the conclusion, the bold letter. Remember, being fully aware of the present moment considerably increases your chances of being happy. That Buddha Tiaro Hema, Nepal, Natan Chawyan, the Jensen to Kuweshike. Dila the Maripin, Jiku Beshike. Tana Ludesuraga, Bega Lude. Ye look at check go away pit. And I go my see how go share load. Tax repeat. Tila Suraka, Bea Lude. Go ye, go restrain Malobu, control Malobu so ye. Go down to town Lude. Teacup Jessie day. Sing it day. So shown there. At a jump go control load. Dakala mindfulness by Tila Suraka. Bhavana Surado, Tayat Bebo. Go a say him a people needed a tweed emotion, and I go minute and second and nale the iti. Jinjana, Tana Dina Bhavana Surada, mindfulness for Mudiga. A cool, they may be a Akona Catero. Neurologist, yeah.တရားထိုင်တဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်မှာ mindful ဖြစ်တဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ် စိတ်တည်ငြိမ်တဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ် အုံနောက်ကဘယ်လိုဖြစ်တယ် restless ဖြစ်တဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ် အုံနောက်ဘယ်လိုဖြစ်တယ် အိမ်ကနေပြီးတော့ယုံလာတဲ့ကားပေါ်မှာခါတဲ့တစ်ချိန်လုံးစိတ်ညစ်လာတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ် အုံနောက်ကဘယ်လိုဖြစ်တယ် အဲ့ဒါတွေအကုန်ပြောနိုင်ပြီ အဲ့လိုသိတဲ့ခါကျတော့စိတ်ကူရတာလည်းပိုလွယ်တယ် ကလေးလေးတယောက်ကဟိုကစားကွင်းထဲမှာ ယောက်ျားလေးတယောက်အသက်9နှစ်ဆယ်နှစ်လောက်သူနဲ့အရွယ်ချင်းတိတ်မကွာတဲ့ကလေးမလေးတယောက်ကိုဒီ American football ဟိုနဲ့ bat လေအဲ့ဟာနဲ့သွားရိုက်တာဘာမှမစိမဆမ်းနေချင်းချက်ချင်းသွားရိုက်တယ်အရင်က aggressive ဖြစ်လာလူတွေကတော့ဒါ juvenile ဒီ detention center ပို့ရမှာပေါ့ကလေးထောင်ပို့ရမှာ But the art the meditation and neurological Leila, psychiatrist, she Galileo. To our hope, the need and to hang or declare the wall of Jetom. Hoglima Jetom, Hoglima Leve, healing Miana, Tiglia Leve, Celebiro, the Diao Yabin Macau, not Gilan to Taludu, Gilu, Taya. သူ့ရဲ့အုံနောက်ကို brain scan လုပ်ချင်တယ် brain ထဲမှာ cyst တွေ့တာတဲ့ cyst လေးတွေ့တာဟိုရေအိတ်လေးတွေ့တယ်အဲ့ဒါခွဲပြီးတော့ရေအိတ်လေးထုတ်ရတဲ့ခါကျတော့ကလေးကအယမ်းကိုသဘောကောင်းတဲ့ကလေးအုံနောက်ထဲမှာဘာတွေဖြစ်နေလဲဆိုတော့ခုသိ ဒါပေမဲ့လူတိုင်းက brain scan မလုပ်နိုင်ဘူးအဲ brain scan လုပ်တဲ့ fMRI machine ကလည်းနေရာတိုင်းမှာမရှိဘူးမရှိတဲ့ခါကျတော့ဘုံဘုံကဘယ်လိုလုပ်ပြီးတော့ဟိုက symptom တွေသိနိုင်တော့ symptom တွေသိနိုင်တယ်အဲ့ဟာemotion ကိုကြည့်ပြီးတော့သိနိုင်တယ်လို့ဒါနီးတနည်းနေနဲ့အဲ့ဒါဘုံဘုံ emotion အကြောင်းအများကြီးဟော fMRI နဲ့လူတွေအုံနောက် imaging မလုပ်နိုင်ဘူးလေမလုပ်နိုင်တဲ့ခါကျတော့လူတွေ emotion ကို emotion ကိုပြန်ပြီးတော့ read လုပ်နိုင်စေ if you can read your own emotion you are scanning your brain ဒီစာအုပ်ထဲမှာ gene brain and emotions also ဖတ်ထုတ်ပါတယ်ဒီစာအုပ်ထဲမှာပထမဆုံး chapter 1ပထမဆုံး what is the passage emotion reflect our relation with the worldကိုယ် emotion အတက်ကြတယ်ဖြစ်အဲ့ဒီအတက်ကြဘယ်သူကိုအကြောင်းပြုပြီးတော့ဖြစ်တာတော့ကိုယ့်ရဲ့ social environment ကိုအကြောင်းပြုပြီးတော့ဖြစ်တာဒါကြောင့်ကိုယ့်ရဲ့ relation to the world ဆိုတာဒါနဲ့ဖြစ်နေတာဒီ emotion ကဟိုအယောင်ဆိုးပြတာပေါ့နော် emotion reflect our relation with the world and play an essential role in our ability to adapt to environmental challenges environment က social environment ရနောက်ပြီးတော့ eco environment နှစ်ခုစလုံးအဲ့ဒီကို adapt မလုပ်နိုင်ဘူးဘုံဘုံတော့မပြောင်းလဲနိုင်ဘူးဆိုရင်ပေါ့လက်မခံနိုင်ဘူးဆိုရင် survive မဖြစ်နိုင်ဘူး adapt လုပ်နိုင်တဲ့ species တွေက survive ဖြစ်တာပဲအဲ့ဒါကြောင့်တရားထိုင်တဲ့အခါမှာအုံနောက်ကဘယ်လိုအပြောင်းလဲရှိတယ်ဆိုတာကိုဘုန်းတော်ဗီဒီယိုကလစ်3ခုပြမယ်နော်ဟိန်းသူရဝင်လာပါဘုန်းတော်ကြည့်ဒီမီလေးပယ်လိုက်ပါမှာဒါခေါင်းမြင်ရအောင်ဒီမီလေးပယ်လိုက်ဒီအဓိကတော့ဒီတလုံးဟုတ်ပြီဟိုနောက်ကနောက်တန်းမြင်ရလားမမြင်ရဘူးတင်တယ်ဒီဖက်နဲ့တိုးရမလားဒီဖက်နဲ့တိုးပေးရမယ်တိုးရင်တော့ဒီရလေးပဲနည်းနည်းလေးဒီကနောက်ဆုံးဒီတက်ကြီးလို့ဒီရှိမနေအနေနဲ့ရှိတယ်ဒီပဲfull screen ဖြစ်အောင်လုပ်ပေးပါရတော့ရပါရပါမှန်လားscreen ခကြည့်လို့ရလား full screen လို့ရတယ်ရတယ်တလားဆိုရင်အခန်းသေးမကြည့်ပါဘူးမြင်ရပါတယ်အချိန်ကုန်မှဆိုလို့ရတယ်ဖွင့်လိုက်ပါစလိုက် The science of mindfulness နော်
When people train in mindfulness what we see is the brain patterns changing one thing that happens for example is the insula which is part of the neocortex, which is associated with empathy, with experiencing your body as it is, rather than, as it were, getting into stories about the body, that begins to uncouple with the ventromedial prefrontal cortex. Now, that part of the cortex is very much associated with what you might call the narrative aspect of the self, that is, language, images, generating some adult stories about the self. And if these uncouple, what people are able to experience and what we see happening in the brain is the ability to activate the compassion centers, as it were, without activating the stories which often turn into overthinking or rumination as people experience it. For people who are suicidal when they get depressed, they can recover really quite well, but then if a small amount of mood catches them unawares, not only do they they start blaming themselves and so on, but they get a lot of tunnel vision. In other words, they can't see solutions to their problems. And this happens very rapidly. We've shown in our laboratory work that it can happen in 10 minutes. We can use the electroencephalogram to measure the patterns in people's brains when their mood starts to go down. What happens is that you begin to see a neural signature in the brain that was there from long evolution and, as it were, correlated with running away from predators. Now this system switches on when we're trying to avoid even our own thoughts. So if you get a suicidal thought, you don't like it, what you do is try to avoid it, and it just makes the situation worse. Work by David Creswell in the United States has found that if people are not mindful, then the amygdala, the part of the brain that underlies fight and flight, the evolutionary old part of the brain, that tends to be chronically overactive. And what happens during mindfulness practice is it tends to damp that down, tends to naturally inhibit as you learn mindfulness. And that means that people are less likely to be, as it were, constantly stressed, rushed off their feet, but also they're less likely to respond to their own negative thinking, which, when people aren't mindful, tends to trigger these fight and flight responses. We've been working now on this for 8.5 years, and even work before that showed that mindfulness actually reduces the risk of depression by half in people who are the most recurrent depressed, people with 3 or more episodes that many other treatments had failed to treat. We also know that it's as good as antidepressants in doing that. Now, one thing that we didn't know 8 years ago is that repeatable? And we found it is repeatable, both in our lab and in labs around the world, in lots of different countries, have found the same result. And that's very confident, because what can be very frustrating in the field of psychological research is if you have one exciting result which doesn't replicate the next time you do a trial. Actually, we find now in 6 different trials with almost 600 patients done right across the world that actually those results hold up. There's initial spectacular results, actually, which we were totally surprised by at the time. Well, actually, they're no longer surprising.
The professor Oxford professor of clinical psychology. I'm an Oxford Mindfulness Center, so that she, the division Tana, she, the road looked at a cool or the Kuba depression, a jive people, relapses people, and you do. Peluka maro. Sene kuda, drunk in a kuda, now venture side effect a yamaka the Luria Macana. Kidney failure, the left the child side effect, the mood disorder, the pope, Yana, Adam, Adam, the new century cataro, coming to pure as pianist out him, the mindful way through depressions or something. Young Heno Mansage was say long maduro. Ship up. The Baku, Eddie Tanaco, the chamber the Jango Nanai, the Atai, but the Atai anything Jaro. A maro, the name tonight, Tayana. The name tonight, Tayana is wrong. When I bound house and now Sunday Matana, such out nice, goes in the town night. Goes in the town night, they are Taina. Go emotion go deep, and the depression, do the way joker, low one, young. Janet do lazy and enjoy dosage the Mia short. Given to pure hand, they are also. Oh, now my Santa Kushi day. The Kugaro information go yabi so yin. Narrative aspects in narrative. Well, narrative suraka, oh no, how did you whip and have? What story did create loadable? But do a young that are now chat. The last way no one live information message did. But do I didn't night when now chat. Information. The near my bureau have now say solo thing. Takaro, narrative set out. Narrative set at her psychology, my rumination look for it. Rumination. Mình làm mà sao cái nó là baby to đó con này bộ tell me. Mingla sound beer can tell a load to let me a low much stress in Yas or Lamo Popu. I don't. The 2 years savings are limited. Go a little tree. Add a ruminate, add a story narrated. I don't. The art and the mindfulness sheet is so in it. The information go you then the Duka, a boat type of Salmo top amalo. Taka top upload there. Top amalo. Now I went now jar. Any bomb, a council judge, Melodiu. Melodiu. Edilu, Malobuso yene, compassion center, sir. Karuna. A chicken na ona ye, insula soreniaga, activate people, the Queenland Pomiare. The Galo Diniaga activate people when Dinia theatre. The Galo Dinia activate citizen, Dinia theatre. I know Matu. A look at Matu. Paga, the Kuba, no? If you're not good touch me. Not good touch me. Message got to do by it, don't see the hand to do it. Tara big GB the hand also take it over. When they twelve go tea like that, say come Manina, Manina, let me in Busser tea like that. Oh, say him difficult emotion opinions or she opinion of tea like that. I'll tea so yeah, ever go to have a need and never narrative elsewhere go to have need. The top up them alone. At low as a compassion center. I go activate top of compassion center, Lord Luca. The Chandu a dream or droga. Connected she had the name of your coaching says narrative channel, go limit like till you are my child in so return. I look by count and low. You're not prepared to see. Mummy, no, a Arab sit a piano. The science of mindfulness.
So the science behind mindfulness is really down to something called neuroplasticity. Now neuroplasticity means that the brain is plastic, and that means it can change over time. So we know that if we repeat certain things over and over again, we get new habits of mind, we get new wirings of the brain. And it is possible to effectively rewire your brain, so to change the way it's made up by the things that you practice and by the habits that you form. What we see through mindfulness meditation, so research from Harvard University, the results of an 8-week course, is you get an increase in something called grey matter in the hippocampus. Now this is the place where you get learning and memory, where you get self-awareness, and also where you get compassion. So you can build up these things yourself through these kind of practices. You also get a dampening down of something called the amygdala, the part of the brain that releases adrenaline and cortisol. And this gets smaller through the course of an 8-week mindfulness course, and also becomes less active. So when this part of the brain releases the stress response, it's less intense. But also, it returns to normal conditions more quickly. So everybody experiences stress, it's just a normal part of life. But it does mean that we can return to how we should be after that more quickly. The research around the MBCT course, so mindfulness-based cognitive therapy, shows that relapse rates into depression are halved when people are doing an 8-week course. So this is with people who have 3 or more episodes of depression. And also, it is at least as effective as antidepressants. So this is a really big deal, because it means that people can effectively work on themselves to improve their mental health.
Now Now the Kumiji came up among Tutuli. Neuroplasticity, so that Nepal, Naset, those have a city, the theory. You know, to the Tira, at the Chila, we saw in Onoga long of Piano, of Piano in Macau, Chitwabula Michido, shrink people by she. Neuroplasticity, it can be changed, it's changeable. Changeability. Piang Lane and his race alone, Pali Lublucor. Let me have one theory. Pomon Pioy shop your muscle. Piang Lane and his Anesa. Anesa, Miazuti, Anesa and TV. The Anesa theory, Anesa the warrior go Naliniama, go will limit load hard. The reason I now some page my Betwachi Anesa Yaugis. Oh, no, Claranga Clearly, as I went in my Climality of Tabro Jaya. I clearly on now Piaunama, my Piaunam was with Tiglia, Tidamship. Catalo. Quasi good I Cataro. Tiglega, a sworn with account Pianle, Tale Anesa. Anesa Pianle is Reniama. A sworn with account let me have Pianle name. Account a biro leve, a sogo, Pianle name. It depends largely on our choice. Go ye choice him up moody. Time the Ocho choice, leader, never did leader choice, individual choice, that day, Poma moody. That's a neuroplasticity series. Oh, now, yeah, the old brain now, my share, or not old brain, amygdala. Anyhow, need I go RP, need I, Pubinsari, laboratory, Pubinsari laboratory, and Titema, what chemical thing, and I put like that. Now, the year him out the year like a time I'm with you. Go on shout way. Go on shout way. Didn't you my share Ludia as a Naja? By me, I'm Johnny Jalen with you shout way. Elo low in there, the worry center pit, fear center pit, and make the lago go. Jim look benida, exercise look benida. I can't do it muscle boost look benida. Do control of my insular center, and that's what did I make it harder? That's your choice. And look and go Macau Joy Ludoma or I Lude. Not loud Josara, Namale Boo. Namakauna, she is Sura, she is through Letty Dime, Time, a chewing check away. Chida Kaja, through level 16, Nalenia Cat, Coco let the Nale through let the Nale, Elosway, impact on Nedware. Ajado, insulago, exercise low neither. Exercise low. And look young lane I need. A cow on our nebido, a so on our bago, young lane, a so on our nebido, a cow on our bago, young lane, at our neuroplasticity. This is a very good news. Yes, I have got a Wibari Nama Damoso, Pali, Wibari Nama Saraka, Piang later, Damas got the body, Piang later the body and she. I Piang later the body, I go, what Masanja man, 2 tango, leg can be raw. I Piang later the body and line laying Loga and a Yamachito. Poda got that, bigger than the town child. Get not a good hachi.
Attention, didn't it? Sirens and flashing lights are patterns expressly designed to make it very, very difficult for those parts of the brain that process sight and sound to ignore. And I added something else. And that was the unexpected. At least I hope you weren't expecting sirens and flashing lights just because I walked on stage. And that makes it pretty obvious to see why the brain pays attention to that kind of signal, to that kind of input, and especially to the unexpected. When you have a shadow where one shouldn't be, a sudden sound, breath of air on the back of your neck, your name, Dan, coming up from a bubble of noise. It could mean danger or opportunity. And at this point you're probably thinking, why is she asking us to pay attention to attention? And that's because of nearly 50 years of working with individuals and organisations to help them change, develop, learn, do what they want to do. Attention is simply the most important factor I've come across. And of course it's not attention by itself, it's attention together with practice and with passion. And the practice is not mechanistic practice. It's intense, deep, dedicated, hard-working, try, fail, try again, improve, do it again, one step forward, 2 steps back, do it again, that kind of practice. And in order to do that, you need the kind of motivation that comes out of passion. Up until about the middle of the last century, scientists believed that the adult brain wasn't plastic. It didn't change very much. Of course, it changed a bit, but the big changes happened in infancy, from the womb to about 3 years old, and in adolescence up until about the end of the teen years. And after that, well, it was a bit of a plateau, or all down there from here, all downhill. I'm very glad to be able to tell you today that that is simply not true. The adult brain changes significantly with every input that comes in. The point is how to change it in a direction you want to go in, and sustainably and significantly. How do you change a bad habit? How do you acquire a good one? How do you become better at a particular skill? And how does all that work? Well, it's our emotions on a spectrum from fear to trust and love that act as labelling machines. They say, this is good, this is bad, and oh, hang on a moment, that potentiator, the alt bit. And it is that attention, whether it's bottom up, coming in from outside, the environment or our inner environment, our body, or top down, coming from where we put it, that is how we direct our attention. And of course, fear attracts attention more than anything else. And again, obviously, because you want to get away, you want to survive. But the other labels attract attention too. And Darwin said, hardly any faculty is more important to the intellectual progress of man than attention, as when a cat crouches by a hole waiting to spring on its prey. Some people say attention is like a conductor, orchestrating a number of neural networks to fire at a level and intensity that takes an input from the subconscious to the conscious and enables the brain to work on it. Well, that has an implication. And the implication is that attention appears to be the mechanism through which the brain focuses its resources. Now that is the most important thing I'm going to say to you today, so I'll say it again. Attention is the mechanism through which the brain focuses resources on something. And that means if you can direct your attention, you are directing where your brain puts its greatest resources. How good is that? And why should that matter? matter? It matters because the brain is highly resource intensive, and as a result, it's a very competitive environment. Different parts of the brain compete for processing power in order to do things. And the resources aren't infinite. So that processing power, to be able to direct it, is absolutely phenomenal. That power of attention was first discovered by the great Michael Mesenic in his lab doing some experiments with owl monkeys. They looked at the brain of owl monkeys before and after the experiment, where they were tapping a lever with one finger for a reward of a fruit pellet. And after that experiment, that part of the brain that controlled the finger had literally acquired more territory, more neurons were devoted to finger pressing. But the interesting bit comes when they changed the experiment, and instead of the reward coming as a result of the finger pressing on the lever, it came as a result of a sound coming through earphones. And guess what? It wasn't a part of the brain that controlled the finger, it was a part of the brain that controlled hearing, that grew. And there's another example much closer to home. There are no windows in this room, but if there were, you could look out and see plenty of London black cabs. And the brains of London black cab drivers have a greater right posterior hippocampus. And that was published by Eleanor Maguire and her team from UCL in 2006 to great acclaim. But there were some questions, like, is it because they're cab drivers that the right posterior hippocampus is bigger? Or is it that people with that kind of configuration in the brain choose that kind of career? So they looked at bus drivers' brains, and they found the same differential. Taxi black cab drivers' brains were significantly larger in that part. And then they did something else. They looked at London black cab drivers' brains after retirement. And the right posterior hippocampus had begun to shrink already 3 months later. Use it or lose it, literally. What happens, in addition to territorial expansion, is that communication between neurons increases in efficiency. There's simply more neurotransmitters. The more certain neurons communicate between themselves and the brain and the body in patterns on a regular basis. So the more you practice, the easier that communication becomes, the more regular it becomes, the more reliable it becomes. And not just more neurotransmitters, increased sensitivity in the reception. And that's not all. More synapses are created because more dendrites grow along an axon when neurons communicate regularly, when they fire regularly together in response to the same signal. That's called learning. And even that's not all. Regular firing of a neuron causes the axon to be wrapped round more thickly by the myelin sheath, which acts as the black rubber coating on the old copper wire. It protects the signal from leakage and it sends it down the axon more quickly. So you have increased territorial growth, increased synaptic efficiency, speed and regularity, and that underlies just the most fantastic things. Creativity, as we were hearing, learning, development, change, skill acquisition, the ability to swim like a fish and win an Olympic gold medal, the ability to lose a bad habit by disciplining yourself, to practice not going to the fridge immediately on coming home from work, the ability to be an expert driver, not necessarily a Formula 1 driver, but the kind of driver that is so good and so expert and so knowledgeable, by the time you've got home from work, you can't remember how you got there. And that helps the brain conserve energy. Of course, you cannot really be Michael Phelps unless you're shaped like Michael Phelps. But you can be a gold medal winner, world champion, and Olympian, starting rowing at 18, and having the passion to practice and improve and get there, in spite of holding down a full-time job, like my son did, who's here today, for which I'm very grateful. And both that top-down and bottom-up attention is what changes our brain. But it's the top-down stuff, it's the stuff you direct that will change your brain in order to achieve the results you want. And you've heard the 10,000-hour rule. Yeah, you have to practice for 10,000 hours. But after this, you will know different. It's not enough. If you practice automatically without paying attention, it won't work. So what have you got? How do I practice paying attention, you might ask? Well, meditation, believe it or not, is one of the best ways of practicing focusing your attention, because that's what it's about. Focus your attention. When you get distracted, focus it again. When you get distracted, focus it again. And that's pretty hard work in itself. What else can you do? Well, you have goal setting. Articulating goals, whether they're long, medium, or short term, is very good for helping to focus your attention. And what's more, achieving a goal, having that little tick, gives you a boost of feel-good chemicals, like a win does. And that helps increase your motivation as well. And another thing that helps you develop your attention and your motivation is being in flow. And that means actively looking for stretch activities, things that are beyond your current capabilities, but not outside your potential. Pushing yourself and trying and failing. How many people have seen this? Well, I'm not letting any cats out of the bag then. This is simply, for me, the best example of one of the downsides of paying attention. The bonus of paying attention is if you pay attention to something, you actively take attention away from other stuff, like emails or a pneumatic drill outside your window. You literally don't see or hear that, because that's not where your attention is. How many of you saw the gorilla? That's very good. I didn't. I'm one of the 52% of the people who would have gone to court and sworn on whatever that there was no gorilla. And just think about that in terms of how you behave at work. How often do you simply not hear or see someone? And what message that sends? I've been working with some really exceptional people, some great leaders. And what I've noticed throughout my career is they have two characteristics. One is they are absolutely laser-like in focusing their attention. The other is they switch that attention when they have to. Because the downside, the double-edged sword of attention, is missing stuff when you're paying attention elsewhere. And that is due, being able to switch your attention at will is also a skill you can practice. And you practice it by becoming expert enough to spot signals like an oil price that's going down when it shouldn't, by knowing how to balance your gut instinct with your brain, by being open, genuinely open, starvingly open, for ideas and thoughts and attitudes from other people. And that's what I found in truly great leaders, that openness willingness to pay attention to something that isn't theirs, to something that challenges them, is just absolutely amazing. And it too is a skill that you can practice. So, I'm going to give you some advice, because what I've done is I've actually given you something that's very, very hard to do. Paying attention is tough. Practicing is tough. You know, not everyone can do it. Not everyone wants to do it. Not everyone wants to achieve greatness or expertise, or even a skill, or even get rid of a bad habit. But I've also taken away quite a few excuses. So my advice is, start by finding your passion, because that's going to make the rest easy, or easier. Practice paying attention, and practice, practice, practice. Thank you very much.
အခုတရားထိုင်ဖို့အချိန်ရောက်ပြီtheory နေနဲ့ဗုဒ္ဓတရားတော်တွေနဲ့ရော science တွေနဲ့ရောဒါကိုယ်အတွက်ကောင်းတယ်လူတိုင်းအတွက်ကိုယ် environment အတွက်ကောင်းတယ်ဆိုတာဒါဘာမှပြောစရာမရှိဘူးအခုဒီမနက်ပိုင်းကိုဘုန်းကအခြေခံသတိပဋ္ဌာန်ယုံမှာလက်အသုံးပြုနိုင်တယ်ကားပေါ်မှာလည်းအသုံးပြုနေအိမ်မှာလည်းအသုံးပြုနိုင်တယ်9မိနစ်7မိနစ်လောက်နဲ့လုပ်နိုင်တယ်အဲ့အခြေခံသတိပဋ္ဌာန်နဲ့သင်ပေးမယ်တရားထိုင်ဖို့ဒီတဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်လည်းရှိတယ်ထွက်လေဝင်လေနာသီဖြားမှကြည့်တဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်လည်းရှိတယ်ဖောင်းတဲ့ဘက်နဲ့ကြည့်တဲ့ပုဂ္ဂိုလ်လည်းရှိတယ်နှစ်ခုစလုံးအလုပ်ဖြစ်တယ်ထွက်လေဝင်လေရှူရှာတဲ့ခါမှာလည်းပြင်းပြင်းရှူတာရှိတယ်ဖြည်းဖြည်းရှူတာရှိတယ်နှစ်ခုစလုံးအလုပ်ဖြစ်တယ်အခုဟာကဝင်လေထွက်လေကိုကြည့်တာဘာလို့ကြည့်တာတော့ဆို is attention training attentionကိုတတိလို့ခေါ်တယ် attention training ကိုဘာဝနာလို့ခေါ်တယ် attention training တရားထိုင်တဲ့ meditation ကို the art of attention လို့ခေါ်တယ် the art of attention ဒီမနေ့ပြောတာတော့ art ကတိတ်မပါဘူး science တွေပဲပါ the science of attention as the art and science of attention ပဲဆိုပါတော့အဲ့တော့အဓိကပြောချင်တာကတော့အဓိကသတိထားမှာကစိတ်က fight and flight လုပ်သလားဆိုတာဒါလေးပဲမကြိုက်ဘူးဆိုရင်အဲ့ဒီမကြိုက်တဲ့ဟာနဲ့သွားရံဖြစ်တာဒီလိုမဖြစ်သင့်ဘူးဆိုပြီးတော့လေအဲ့ဒါသွားပြီးတော့ရံဖြစ်တာကာကြက်နေပြီကာကြက်တယ်ကိုဘာမှမတတ်နိုင်ဘူးကာမကြက်သင့်ဘူးဆိုပြီးတော့အဲ့ချိန်မှာသွားတွေးတဲ့အတွက်ကြောင့်မို့လို့ဘာဖြစ်တာတော့ကိုယ့် energy ပဲပို့ကုန်အဲ့ချိန်မှာကာကြက်နေတာဟိုတကယ်လို့ဒီကာကြက်နေတာငါလည်းဒုက္ခရောက်တခြားလူလည်းဒုက္ခရောက်တယ်ဒီဒုက္ခနဲ့ဘယ်လိုလုပ်မှာတော့အဲ့လိုတွေးနေကရုဏာဖြစ်သွားရောအဲ့ချိန်မှာအသုံးပြုတဲ့ energy ကသိမသုံးမနဲ့ကိုသူကအကောင်းဘက်ကိုသွားတာအဲ့ဒါကျတော့ fight လုပ်တာမဟုတ် fight လုပ်ရဲဆိုတာကဒေါသဖြစ်တာကိုပြောတာဒေါသဆို frustration နဲ့ဒေါသပဲ irritation နဲ့ဒေါသပဲ short temper အကုန်လုံးဒေါသတွေကြီးပဲ destructive emotion ဖြစ်လာတာကိုပြောတာဒါကြောင့်ကိုယ့်ရဲ့ရင်ထဲမှာကိုယ်နှလုံးသားထဲမှာနည်းနည်းတင်းကျပ်လာပြီဆိုရင် emotion ဖြစ်တယ်ကိုသိဘေးကလူတွေကိုလည်းပဲကြည့်ပြီးတော့စိတ်ထဲမှာနည်းနည်း irritable ဖြစ်လာတယ်ဆိုရင်ဒါသိပြီ subconsciously you're fighting with the experience မသိစိတ်ထဲကနေ subconscious mind ထဲနေပြီးတော့ fighting လုပ်နေတယ်အဲ့ဒါကြောင့်မလို့ဝင်နေထွက်လေကြည့်တဲ့အခါမှာဘာတွေးမှာတော့ဆိုစိတ်လွင့်အောင်တွေးမယ် Luine Seiko, Tabiro Yamapine, a count of soul Tabiro Muipane, say Luina Macau, Amalone, Mulupio, narrative sent how young. Or say Luine, say Luine Chema, say Metinio, Talau Lebe Tilay, and I can fact. Pama, a council Muipamu, you are not being judgmental. Not being judgmental. Raja say Luine, or say Luine, auto mind, automatic mind, auto mind, the auto mind of Korea. Auto mind, a low level to react low meeting, Majai said to other pillar. Majai was in Majai or Majai said pit wabi. Majai said, Majai said, I had little Kansabi. Majai said, you Kansabi. I don't know you Kansabi. I don't know a cow also move pan. Did all that Macau, Machin the Munga the art I need a the other kind of women put it now silent and I popular so be oh, I look to have a judgment of pane. Adima, daughters and daughters of the Tilubana, and I you should be experiencing that mindfully. I don't know you can't have him. The delay can't have you. I look can't have him, I don't know something. Number take say winner. Number negaro judge a tiny swing and yawned at it. Yawned swing that sake to a fight looked at it. Mahoney never trapped at it, flight looked at it. Adam sensation she at near home, the relay pool with all demand naginate, demand yawned. I had you. Lacan be when it was a piano. From home, Poma, Tonia, register, release, return, register. Sunaga. Now is a yawn register loaded. Matter core, acknowledge loaded. Accept look, register look. Being to release look like to made her return back and down 21 years and 21 years ago, center in that home. No central focus in that home. 21 years central focus in that home you below. Central focus in that home you below. People are at the chat at wandering mind pip me, the pain pip me, sleepiness pip me, emotion pip me. I had to go naming look like naming so I took one time I all say lunated, say lunated, say I did my not gently, piano, say lunated, say lunated, say lunated. Being when it tried this piano, now as a Tilubana, Pintrelli piano. Top in it, the time. Got that knock. When they slow and deep breathing. When you go deepening, you can count your breathing. Slow and gentle breathing. Breathing in, count 1, 2, 3. Breathing out, 3, 2, 1. One by Yuishara Lego, Yuisha Diti. When you tell a shoe nine of book if you can feel your belly moving, that's even better. Breathing in, count 1, 2, 3. Breathing out, 3, 2, 1. tan chare so yin chare do ai atan ko attention ပေးလိုက်ပါပြီးအတန်ချာနေတယ်တန်ချာတဲ့အခါမှာအတန်ကိုမကြိုက်တဲ့စိတ်ရှိသလားရှိရင်အဲစိတ်လေးကိုလည်းပဲအတိမပြုပေးလိုက်ပါ register လုပ်ပါ reaction တွေဖြစ်သွားတယ်မကြိုက်တဲ့စိတ်တွေဖြစ်သွားတယ်ဝင်လေထွက်လေစူးစမ်းပြီးတော့ attention ပေးပါ attention များများပေးလေသူမဆက်ဖို့ကောင်းလာလိမ့်ပါပဲသူနဲ့ပတ်သက်တဲ့အုံနောက်ပိုင်းဆိုင်ရာ insulin ကလည်းပို့ပြီးတော့အားကောင်းလာလိမ့်မယ်စူးစမ်းပြီးတော့ဝင်လေထွက်လေကိုကြည့်ပေးပါဖြစ်ပေါ်လာတဲ့စိတ်ပြန်လည်မှုတွေဝေဒနာတွေအတွေ့တွေသူတို့ကိုလည်းပဲရံမဖြစ်ပဲနဲ့လက်ခံလိုက်ပါ develop some acceptance လက်ခံပါ le te ne to li nga thi pa twa le nga le to ne te a chain si va pi me lo puoi lo ya va pi ni le sa re na la me na ka ma ne ke panana ka sa ne ke